Oh, right. Sonic Forces is 5 years old now. Okay. That's right. It is finally that time. With the release of Sonic Frontiers literally less than 24 hours away from now, Sonic Forces has to remind us of its existence. Now I think I need to make it clear that I don't actually hate Forces. I believe it is just mediocre overall, and can have some fun with it here and there, but nevertheless, the damage it has done to its fanbase is something which will never be forgotten. All the hype and positivity many felt leading up to its release, with the look of a darker Sonic story, Shadow finally being playable again, and just the fact that we finally had a true successor to Sonic Generations, gave us all hope that 3D Sonic would finally be great again. But it was all thrown back in our faces with the disappointment that is Sonic Forces. And in my opinion, the biggest disappointment this franchise has ever produced. It just had so many fantastic ideas, having a story where Eggman actually defeated Sonic and took over, having a darker tone, the whole concept of Infinite and the Phantom Ruby. It was the execution that ruined everything. Now, with a game hitting a milestone like this, I usually give a retrospective on it, but I thought that with Forces, I'd do something different, mostly because I have a series called Understanding Sonic Forces that is still currently in the works. And by in the works I mean I am majorly procrastinating with it. I will continue at some point, but right now, I've kinda got my hands full right now with Frontiers and a whole bunch of other stuff. Anyways, like I said earlier, rather than doing a retrospective on Forces, for its 5-year anniversary, I decided to tackle a question that has been on my mind recently. Should Sonic Forces be forgotten? Now there's two parts to this question I think. One, in terms of the fan base, and two, Sega and Sonic Team. Now I ask this question because it's clear that Forces' failure has plagued Sonic discussion for the worse. You can't say one good thing about Forces without having an entire army come after you. And then with Sega, it looks like everything relating to Sonic Forces is trying to be ignored, such as Infinite for example. So the question is, should we just ignore Sonic Forces entirely, or let it live on as a game with a plethora of wasted potential? That's what we shall be answering in today's video, so sit back, relax, as we go to find the answer to this very question. To make things easier for ourselves, I think it would be wise to look at Sega's mindset for Forces, as they are the ones pumping out these games after all. Sonic Forces is not the first time that Sega has tried to ignore a Sonic game's existence. For the longest time, it seemed that Sonic 3 and Knuckles just didn't exist because Sega did not have the rights to the Michael Jackson music, and so could have ported it along with its older brothers Sonic 1, 2, and CD. But when I mean a game being ignored by Sega, this is obviously not what I mean. When I say a game being ignored, I actually mean that it is attempted to be erased from the canon of Sonic and just be completely forgotten by Sega. A good example of this would be Sonic the Hedgehog 4, both episode 1 and 2. Sonic 4 was supposed to be the grand sequel to the original trilogy on the Genesis, by going back to the classic 2D side-scrolling gameplay of those games, but sadly, Sonic 4 releasing as it did not deserve the title Sonic 4. Unfortunately, the damage has already been done. There's no turning back now. Sonic 4 is, and always will be, the true Sonic 4. No Advance, Mania, or Rush, but Sonic 4. Whether you like it or not, you cannot change that fact. And it looks like Sega does not like that either. Ever since the release of Sonic 4 Episode 2, in my opinion a good game, Sega have actively been trying to act like Sonic 4 never happened. It all started where they decided to cancel Sonic 4 Episode 3 due to the bad reception of the series. It wasn't like they would be losing much by doing so, but now we have an uncompleted story for Sonic 4, and what makes it even worse is that Sega has just completely ignored the game. Even with games like 06 and the Boom series, they've still been acknowledged in some way, shape or form after their failures, but with Sonic 4, not so much. Sonic 4 just doesn't make sense in the canon of Sonic at all. It's supposed to be a sequel to Sonic 3, but it has Mono Sonic with the homing attack and Splash Hill, an area that looks like Green Hill but isn't. Then with episode Metal, it shows that Metal Sonic apparently stayed on Little Planet until Eggman revived him again, but wait, is Stardust Speedway canonically a bad future? I mean, the same thing happened in Sonic Generations, but would Sonic really leave Little Planet in a bad future? That does not sound like something Sonic would do at all. It's all these reasons as to why it seems like Sega is trying to forget Sonic 4 even happened. Heck, it wasn't even alongside the games in Mania's reveal trailer in the elevator. All that happened with Sonic 4 is seeming to me like it's happening with Forces too. Now I'd argue that Forces got it a little better compared to Sonic 4 and other games too, since we got Metropolis showing up in Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020. My god, that is a long title, my god. But apart from that, I'm not seeing much else. There are a couple of things from Forces which have been brought forward into future games, like the idea of customization and then Frontiers using assets from Forces, which isn't a bad thing by the way. But in terms of Forces being referenced itself, I'm not seeing any of it. Now we haven't got many games since Forces for it to actually be referencing, so that could play a part in it, and also, we have the IDW comics which continued from where Forces left off. But there are still some signs which lead me to believe that Forces could end up like Sonic 4, and it all goes down to Infinite. Infinite was such a cool villain, bringing back character themes after a long time, and just how much power he had was awesome, but the way he was handled is such a disrespect to his huge potential. At the end of Forces, Infinite just flew away, and that was the last we ever saw of him. No massive explosion or him being sucked into null space, just gone. And that is honestly just sad. What makes it even sadder is that after Forces, Infinite is never mentioned or seen ever again, outside of some merch and added to Forces Speed Battle. But for Forces Speed Battle, it's weird because you'd think with Infinite being the main villain of Forces, he'd be a priority to add into the mobile game, but no. He was added in 4 years after the game release, which is crazy if you ask me. What really seals the deal for me here is that after Forces, Sega told people like Ian Flynn that Infinite was not allowed to be used in any media at all, not the comics, games, or anything. It's as if Sega were trying to erase everything Forces did entirely, and you know what? I can see why. Forces did a lot of retconning to the past Sonic games. Classic Sonic was no longer Sonic from the past, but from an alternate dimension. No humans were to be seen at all, and the structure of the world just doesn't make any sense. It was all too similar to Sonic 4, where that game messed up a lot in terms of canon, so Sega tried to forget it. So, was Sega doing the same thing with Forces? Not even gonna lie. Even with all I've said so far, recently, it seems like Sega and Sonic Team have been more open to referencing Forces and acknowledging its existence. We've seen in a number of interviews that Iizuka does actually like the darker story and ideas that Forces brought to the table, and always goes back to say that they want to learn the mistakes from Forces and improve on it in Frontiers, which is very admirable. Another thing which is quite recent is Tales Tube, a series on the official Sonic the Hedgehog YouTube channel. What that series aims to do is clean up a lot of areas that are messed up with the canon and provide reasons for certain things, which includes the story of Forces. Apparently, the Two Worlds theory is dead. The world in Forces is the same one as in Unleashed, SA1, SA2, Heroes. It all takes place on the same world. Also, Gun was apparently destroyed by Eggman's forces in Forces 2. Wait, that sounds a bit weird actually. Let me try again. Also, Gun was apparently destroyed by Eggman's army in Forces as well. So that's why we don't see Gun in the game. Now, while this doesn't fix everything that Forces broke, like Classic Sonic for example, it is still good to see that Sega are willing to accept that Forces is part of the franchise. They're even trying to fix what it did. Infinite has also got some kind of explanation to his disappearance. According to the Sonic Bible, the Encyclopedia, Infinite was absorbed into the Phantom Ruby after Eggman was defeated, which is why he is never seen again after the events of Forces. And while that is kind of a cheap way to send him off, some reason is better than no reason, I suppose. Now with all this, it's clear that while Sega did start off by trying to forget Sonic Forces' existence, it seems like they have finally accepted that Forces is part of the canon, and are slowly starting to acknowledge it properly. And in my eyes, that is a good thing. No matter how bad a game is, or how much wrong it does, in terms of the story, I don't think that should mean the game gets lost in time, never to be remembered again. Because while Sega can pretend it doesn't exist, it will never truly go away, as the game is still a game they made and released to the public. And of course, people have played those games, and they will never forget it. And believe me, this fanbase has not forgotten Forces since its release, so let's talk about the flip side of the coin now, from Sega to the fans. Sonic Forces has done irreparable damage to this fanbase. As we said in the introduction of this video, if you dare say one thing that is slightly positive about Forces, prepare to have 50 different people tell you why you're wrong and to go and commit unlive. It is honestly quite ridiculous at this point, and can make even talking about anything relating to the game annoying, because you'll have a massive group of people with absolutely nothing useful to say other than Sonic Forces, but things are only going to get worse, as there's been a recent uprising of Sonic Forces appreciation. And I'm not saying you can't appreciate it, but when you have these types of people, like I said earlier, I can only imagine what will become of this fan base. There are loads of kids out there who probably have Sonic Forces as their first and favourite Sonic game, and when they go to talk about it, they're just gonna get dunked on by others just for having an opinion, and that's just sad honestly. Just how we all grew up with and cherished games like the Adventure Duo, Unleashed, Heroes, even 06, so will kids with Forces. It's just how things work. We generally see things in a better light if we grew up with them. I know I definitely do with Sonic 06, which is arguably one of the worst games in the franchise, but just because I grew up with it, I don't really see or remember it as that bad of a game, and that's normal. Kids usually don't care about the little details with games. If they like it, they aren't gonna let anyone stop them. And this is where I'll circle back to our big question. Should Sonic Forces be forgotten? For many kids growing up with the game, that's gonna be a pretty difficult thing to do, compared to people who are more mature and old enough to realize its flaws. But even still, should that really mean Forces should be forgotten? I mean, with 06, people still have their hot takes like me saying the game isn't all that bad, and that they quite enjoyed the game. And this might sound crazy, but I've seen some of this same thing with Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, and compared to 06, that game is atrocious, I'm sorry. So why can't the same thing happen with Forces? It's not like Forces has absolutely nothing to praise because it has quite a number of praiseworthy things in there. You've got the visuals. Forces is a beautiful looking game. You've got the soundtrack, which I know is subjective, but I think has a great soundtrack personally. You've got the return of Shadow, finally being playable in a mainline Sonic game again. Something which hasn't been seen since 2009 in Sonic and the Black Knight. And I could go on further about things that Forces did right, but I won't. My point is that even with how bad many Sonic games can be, there is always that one thing that you can appreciate about it, and is why I believe that Sonic Forces should not be forgotten. These games are part of Sonic's legacy. Whether they are good or bad, they are what make up Sonic today. Sonic Team has taken those bad aspects of those games and used them to improve in the next game. I mean, just look at Frontiers and how vastly different that is to Forces. Without Forces, Sonic Team never would have realised that maybe it's time for something new. Maybe Sonic finally needs to evolve to keep up with modern day gaming. And it's not like everything in Forces was thrown away. Like we said earlier, customization is one thing that started as a domino effect from Forces. It's been in every single Sonic game since Forces. Sonic Forces definitely impacted the series going forward, and whether it was for the better or worse, I'll let you decide on that one, but due to that, Sonic Forces will never be forgotten. It will go down as one of the most disappointing games in the franchise that opened the door to a whole new frontier. I'm sorry, that was awful, but yeah. All I've got to say now is, happy 5th anniversary Sonic Forces. You absolute disappointment of a video game. Anyways, that about does it for today's video. Now I know it wasn't the typical retrospective I usually do for major anniversaries of games, but I hope you were not disappointed with what I put out. Sonic Forces had me hyped from the moment it was announced. 10-year-old me was also oblivious to the future of the game. Funny story actually. Back when Forces was called Project Sonic 2017, I was that hyped for the game that I actually went and searched the words Project Sonic 2017 on the PlayStation Store, hoping to find the next Sonic game, but I of course did not. Man, it's crazy how much you can change in 6 years. But what do you guys think of this topic? Do you believe Sonic Forces should be forgotten? Let me know down below. Love to see what you guys have to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, especially that last one. Don't forget to become unleashed by pressing that join button down below. And remember, it's not necessary. And I will see you all next time. Peace!
Beyond, future's down the road, but the journey